I know, right?
Just make it up as we go. It's
I know.
fine.
I did want to bring some.
Everybody's having so much fun.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome. I'm Catherine Wygant Fawcett. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Family Business. We wanted to come on in. I'm so glad to have you all here. Welcome. Come on in. We have beverages and food, and we have a fabulous program today. So I'd like to welcome our remote users. I think we have quite a few here. We have two, okay? That's good. We're a nonprofit that helps family businesses succeed, and we have these various programs, and you can catch us from anywhere in the world. So today we have them remoting in. I'd like to thank Key Private Bank for being a sponsor for us on our How-To series, which is with this. And I'd also like to thank Bill Watson and Russell for Custom University to host us in this fabulous location. So at the Institute, we have over 40 programs this year, and all members and future members are welcome. We have a few future members here, so thank you.
Heard you talking.
You can check out on our website at fambusiness.org. And then one of our big events that we're doing is our Maine Business Awards. So here is our booklet from last year, and out on the table on front is nominations. If you know of a family business, now is the time to nominate them. And then on May 15th, the holiday in by the Bay, and we have a release here, we will be celebrating it. And we will have Cindy Williams from New Center, Maine, will be our host, and then we will have the Rennings family. So I promise it will be a great Maine adventure. So we extended the deadline because of all our fun snowstorms that we've had. So the deadline is Friday. Self-nominations are welcome. You don't need to be a member of the Institute. We're just going to learn about you and celebrate family businesses. So this is our second today in a series of how-tos for family and business. And we do a number of different educational programs. And at the end of it, I do have door prizes, and I will be sending out a survey because that's how we build our programs. And we did have one that Tony did last year. Dave has done one, Deb has done one with us. And everybody, big topic is always HR. And as Deb likes to tell me, ignorance is no, is no.
Don't get a pass.
You don't get a pass for that. So today is our second in this series. You don't have to come to each. We had an internship one on the beginning of March. And then the next one is April 26th, Understanding Financials for Family Business. And Melinda Irish will be leading that with Dean Michaud, and we will have a family business controller who will be working with us as well. And then, anybody like beer here? Well, on April 9th, we're doing a family business spotlight at Rising Tide. So we have yummy hors d'oeuvres and beer, and they're going to have a sensory sensation for us. So please join us for that on April 9th. So when you become a member of the Institute, all your employees are included. We have various programs that sponsors help contribute, as I mentioned. And then we have our board that helps run us. And so I'm the only employee, but I have various interns and people who help. And we have Dave Chulo here, who is our board chair. We have some other board members. We have Penny, we have Melinda Irish, if you raise your hands. They help us. So the board has also asked each time we run a program that I read a code of conduct. So I will do that. The Institute for Family-Owned Business is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the success of family-owned businesses in the state of Maine. Our purpose is to provide opportunities for family-owned businesses to gain knowledge and expertise concerning the challenges specific to family businesses. Shared expertise comes from IFOB resources, invited experts, sponsors, associate partners, and the family business members themselves. Through the IFOB, relationships will develop that are valuable to all concerned. To foster an environment necessary for trust and sharing, proceedings of the IFOB should not be used for professional advantage. We expect confidentiality in all matters discussed and shared in our programs. Solicitation of business at events or programs is inconsistent with the overall mission of the IFOB. Thank you for respecting this code of conduct. And given that we have some HR stories that are coming up, this is that's the big piece. So today we have Tawny Alvarez with Verrill Dana, and she's going to lead us in HR 411. Verrill Dana is one of our founding sponsors, so we appreciate her help. And after her presentation, we'll take a short break, and then we'll have a great panel of experts that we have here. So Dave Chulo from Career Management Associates, and Peter Lowe from Vaughn and Isaacson, and Deb Whitworth from HR Studio Group. So we want it to be interactive. So Tawny's gonna come up and she might do her Black Lives Tawny, that she likes to do, and scare us all. And then we'll have a little break, and then we'll have a panel, and they'll tell us about, best ways to protect yourself and your business. And I'd like to invite Bill Watson up in just a minute. And at the end of the program, like I said, I'm going to hand out surveys because that's how we build our programs. We have a fabulous Dale Prize from Dale Carnegie, and Dave tells me there's some goodies in there. And I have a hard to come by, highly coveted IFBB baseball cap. So if you haven't put your cards in, don't worry, I can get them later. And now I'll turn it over to Bill.
No, thanks, Kathy. I'd just like to take a second. Just take a second and welcome everyone to Hassan. Catherine always has me up right after she reads the non-compete statement. And David tells me that harassment is great for business. Maybe not your businesses, but his. So,
It's true.
But guys, welcome to Hassan. We feel very, very close to all of you. The IFOB is a wonderful organization, and we think that you guys together certainly add value one to the other. So I'd just like to say welcome. I've got a brochure on the table, a SOAR brochure that talks really about Hassan. Just briefly, we're in a happy place right now. You might have heard me talk about this before recently, but we had our biggest graduating class that we've ever had last May. Our enrollment, the applications that have been accepted, we're up 19% for the fall semester. So things are going very, very well at Hassan. We've got about 3,600 students up on the Bangor campus. We've got about 260 here. The profile of our student here is that they're all working professionals, and we run classes. We've got 15 classrooms here. We run classes from about 5 to 10 each night and an occasional Saturday. So that's kind of what we do right here. Think about this. If you guys need space for your meetings or internal training, we have several companies that think about us here as their corporate training center. So as you know, we've got great parking. It's fairly convenient. We've got technology that Russ knows how to run. I do not. So that's a good thing. So anytime we can help. I'm the general manager for Southern Maine. I'm also director of our internship program, and last session we had a terrific session on the internship program. So, and I also teach up on the Bangor campus. So if I can help with anything, or if Russ can, we are only here to help. So again, welcome. Thanks.
All right, team, this is that moment where I shut the door because my voice carries. And while I'm sure everyone out there wants to hear it, they probably don't. So welcome, everyone. My name's Tawny Alvarez. I know a lot of you. I don't know some of you. But today we are going to do HR for companies without HR. That means this is a tremendously fundamental kind of course. So if you have been in other presentations we've done that give more information or depth kind of to some of these concepts, that's this is going to bring us right back down to the beginning, right? The great part is that during the course of my presentation, though, I'm literally only going to talk about the concepts. Then in the second portion of the discussion, we're going to really put the black cloud. So usually it's like Tawny, massive black cloud. She's going to tell you all the things you can't do and why, right? Pretty much I'm just going to tell you all the laws. And then this wonderful team of, I can't say experts because Peter and I can never be experts at anything based off of bar rules, but this wonderful panel.
And other reasons.
This wonderful panel that is then going to discuss literally how bad this can be for your business if you don't take some of this advice if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't make time in your day to focus on HR issues. We're all extremely, extremely busy. With hope, you are going to take away from this presentation 3, 4, it would be great if it was half a dozen, things that you can bring back to your organization and help do that'll affect change, right? It may not be a massive change, you're not gonna see a change immediately, but moving forward, you're going to realize how much easier your life is because of these small steps that you have taken as a result of something that you picked up here today. So, how many people in the room have an organization of less than 10 people? Okay, how many people have an organization that is 15 to 20 people? Okay, how many between 20 and 50? How many over 50? Okay, perfect. The reason that I asked is because that is important for myself and for the whole panel, just to get a feel for kind of how many people you're dealing with, because you're going to notice as we're talking about many of these laws or what the ramifications could be for your failure to comply with some of these laws, the financial implications are going to be different in some cases based off of how many employees you have. So, there we go. Thank you again to all of our sponsors, and now we are going to get started. There we go. Okay, I didn't sign up for this. I'm sure a lot of people in this audience right now are like, I did not go to school for HR. I know nothing about HR. I actually didn't sign up for this at all. But then somebody signed me up for it, and here I am listening to you. It's important foundationally to understand that personnel oftentimes is an organization's greatest asset as well as its greatest liability, right? Whatever product or service you create, in most situations, your people and the people who are providing that service or are helping you create that product are at the foundation of it and are helping you to create the best possible product. When I say they also are your organization's greatest liability, is because as soon as your, let's say your chief financial officer, because I'm sure every organization in this room has someone who's called a chief financial officer, right? Your operational manager, your frontline supervisor sexually harasses one of your employees, right? There is a chance, and you will find out how much that could cost you, that it shuts your organization down, right? Not just that, based off of the liability from the lawsuit, but also from a PR standpoint, right? People aren't going to buy your product or use your services if they hear that you are not a good organization to work for, right? We live in a really small community. I'm sure if you walked into this room and you didn't know anyone, you will leave knowing 4 or 5 people, and the next time you see them, they will know you by name, they will know your business model. That's a great part about Maine, right? The other, more difficult part about Maine is there are no secrets. So if you're not a good organization to work for, you're not going to be able to recruit and retain the top talent, and people aren't going to want to use your services or buy your product. So keep that in mind when we're talking about your greatest asset and your greatest liability. So let's talk about both sides of the coin here, right? Employees have a duty to do the tasks that are assigned within the bounds of the law. We're not asking people to do anything illegal. And if we do, we're going to talk about whistleblower liability in a couple minutes. And then employers, it's funny, employees kind of have one duty. Employers have a much longer list of duties, and that's not all of the duties they have, right? But employers specifically, let's talk about some foundational duties that they have. They need to maintain a safe work environment. That's a mentally safe work environment and a physically safe work environment. When I say they need to maintain a safe work environment, I'm not just talking about the people here who work in construction or other manual labor type organizations. A safe mental work environment as well. This means not only stuff that is illegal under the law, but also stuff that just doesn't provide a healthy work environment. We have this defense in the legal system in labor and employment that we call the equal opportunity asshole, right? It means that it's somebody who generally is a jerk to everyone, right? But they're not violating a law. They're not a jerk to me because I'm a Hispanic woman. They're not a jerk to David because he's over 40, and a man, right? They are just
Harassed.
they are just a jerk. They are a jerk to everyone. Nobody likes working for them, right? That's what I talk about when I'm saying maintaining a safe work environment. Maintain a work environment that's free from retaliation and discrimination. That's also falling into that mentally safe work environment, right? But it's a little tighter. It's based off of what is retaliation or discrimination under the law. And then making sure that you appropriately pay employees for the work that they perform during the course of their employment. So, first, they just asked me to do payroll. Most times what I hear when I talk to someone who's new to quote-unquote HR or in some other way managing the employment aspects of the organization is, first they asked me to do payroll, and now I seem to be in charge of all the other things that are human resources related. Likely, if you have just been asked to do payroll and that's all you are doing right now, let me tell you what you will be doing shortly. If you are already doing these things, right? Let's have a discussion about ways that they can be done better. So likely you are next going to be asked to assist with onboarding. What's onboarding? Onboarding would be that first day, 2 days, week that an employee is with your organization. It's helping that individual understand your corporate culture, standards, expectations, as well as getting all the paperwork done. So when we're onboarding, let's focus on things that are really physical. So that would be the documents that you have in place for a new employee, right? You're going to want to have an application on file of some sort. A lot of people say, well, I have a copy of a resume. Well, that's helpful, but also having a one-page kind of application that has all the information on it is even of further assistance, because not every resume is going to include the same information on it. Stuff that I don't want on your application. You graduated from high school. Why do I not want that on your application? Age discrimination. I can do my math backwards and figure out exactly how old you were based off of knowing, or within, you know, a 1 year kind of span as to when you graduated high school. Now, if you have your graduation from college, I don't think it's necessary. You don't run into the same issues because one can graduate from college at any age. But again, it's really just unnecessary information. So check your applications when you get back to the office. Make sure that there's not a line for that. Because I promise you, if you got your application online from one of those wonderful free sites, it says name of institution, degree obtained, year obtained, right? It always has that column, and I have to laugh because, as David said, it's just a wonderful generation of business for everyone up here. It doesn't help you guys do your work, though. So, application. You're going to want to have the I-9 form for every single employee, and you're going to want to go back to your office, and you're going to want to check to make sure it's appropriately filled out. When I say appropriately filled out, every single box is filled out. At the bottom, there's your signature with the date. If it's not there now, if your signature at the bottom hasn't shown that you've signed and reviewed these documents, right? Call someone, call a member of the panel, right? Call whoever you use as an advisor and ask them, what do I do in order to fix this? Because I've now audited my practices, I realized I screwed up. There's nothing wrong with screwing up, but figuring out how, when you're auditing your practice, the best way to move forward is really important. You're gonna want federal and state W-4 forms, right? Most personnel files we look through only have a federal W-4 form. There is a state one. You need to have that in the personnel files. Some form of an emergency contact information for someone if there is an accident or something should occur. A handbook acknowledgement, training acknowledgement for sexual harassment, and then depending on what line of work you're in, there often will be other regulations requiring checking for licenses and other certifications. Make sure that you have those in the employee personnel file as well. Now, these are the documents you're going to want to start out as foundationally. In addition to that, moving forward, you're likely going to have annual evaluations, reviews, disciplinary action. But at least from a foundational standpoint, at the onboarding stage, those are the things you want to have in place. Next, it's important to understand the difference between an exempt employee and a non-exempt employee. Oftentimes we hear thrown around terms such as hourly and salary. Salary does not mean the same thing as exempt. So just because an employee is on a salary doesn't mean they're exempt from overtime. So exempt from overtime means that if they work over 40 hours per week, they don't get time and a half for hours worked in excess of 40. So under the law, every single person in this room, right, is entitled to overtime for hours worked in excess of 40 at a rate of time and a half. That's the general law. Everyone in the country is entitled to that, unless they fall into an exception, right? What are those exceptions? The three primary exceptions are if you fall into a professional, executive, or administrative role, right? Now, those three classifications have very strict parameters as to what job duties and functions you perform for your organization in order to fit one of those exemptions, right? If you have simply had an organization in which as soon as somebody gets the role of quote unquote supervisor or manager, they become a salaried employee and no longer get overtime, you need to go back and you need to audit your practices, right? You need to, first you can Google, right? I always say first Google, right? And you can go to the Federal Department of Labor and you can type in administrative exemption, professional exemption, executive exemption, and they're going to give you the parameters in which someone needs to fit in order to qualify as such. I then highly recommend that you contact somebody who does this all the time, who knows exactly what an exempt employee is going to look like and why, so that you can discuss the importance. Now, in the second part of the presentation, we're going to discuss the extreme importance of doing this because this is an area that would bankrupt your company if you are not appropriately classifying individuals. The financial ramifications of a wage and hour sue are tremendous, and there's no defense for, but I didn't mean to do it, right? Or he was a really bad employee, or she was a great employee. It doesn't matter. This is the rule. It's really cut and dry. It's actually pretty emotionless, and doing it right is really important because of the financial ramifications. Understanding what hours worked means. Under state and federal law, hours worked are suffer or permit to work. A person suffers in work between 9 and 5, right? That's the time in which they have been scheduled to work. That is considered, under the law, suffering to work, right? Permitting to work, right, is when Sally comes in at 8:30 and she starts going through last night's emails and she responds to some of them. And she gets her coffee, and then she comes back, but she starts talking to her boss about all the stuff that hasn't happened. And then at 9 o'clock, she turns her timer on and says, okay, my day's starting now. No, her day started at 8:30 as soon as she started responding to emails. You were permitting her to work during that time, and you needed to be paying her for that time. In the same way that at 5 o'clock when Sally clocks out and she walks to the elevator, and her boss says, yeah, but I don't know how to use the scanner. Can you show me how to use the scanner? And Sally goes back and spends 15 minutes showing her boss how to use the scanner, then emailing it to the person, then showing them how to use FedEx and going through this whole process. We are now at 5:15. Sally's day did not start at 9 and it did not end at 5 when she was suffering in her work. It started at 8:30 when we permitted her to begin work till 9, and then it went all the way to 5:15 because we again were permitting her to work. The biggest issue here that we see with small businesses and organizations is cell phones, is people who allow everyone in their organization to have access to email on their cell phones and thus are constantly available. Every time they are available, that is compensable time. Now, it's compensable time for our non-exempt employees, our people who are entitled to that overtime. For our salaried exempt employees, right, And again, remember that salary and exempt don't mean the same thing, but if you're exempt, you have to be salary, right? For our exempt employees, it's fine that they're responding to emails at 2 a.m. and those type of issues. But it's important that if you are permitting someone to work, you are paying them to work. The other thing we hear a lot of with small family-owned businesses is, don't worry, it's just the family for now, and then we use independent contractors. Tell me what you use independent contractors for. Well, they do the same things we do, it's just that they do it when we're busy. That's not an independent contractor. We don't just call someone an independent contractor because they do it for a short period of time and it's not going to last an extended period of time. There's a very specific 7-factor test that one has to qualify for in order to constitute an independent contractor. Otherwise, they are a temporary employee, right? If you would like a copy of that 7-factor test, just shoot me an email afterwards. That's not a representation. You're not going to be charged for it. And I will shoot you a 1-page document that says, here's the test. It's this great, super fun, I call it create your own adventure document, where you're like, I answer yes to this, move on to the next question. You answered no, you've got an employee, yay! Streamers pop up, they really don't. It would be cool if I did have a piece of paper. It would be very Harry Potter-esque. No. Okay, so that is, they just asked me to do payroll. So you realize that, oh, yeah. Then I realized that we didn't have any wage and hour policies, right? Important policies that you should have in place just from a foundational standpoint. A regular payday. Why? Everyone wants to know when they're going to get paid, and I promise you, if you don't have a policy that says when it's going to happen, people are just asking you constantly, and it's annoying. That is not legal advice. Not even a little bit of legal advice. That's just me trying to make your life a little bit easier so you don't have to answer the same question 40 times, right? Defining a work week. This is legal advice, right? You need to define the work week because knowing when the work week starts and ends is going to be the determining factor of when someone's worked 40 hours. Let's say your work week ends on Wednesday at noon, right? So you're going to look everything after Wednesday at noon on the first week and everything between Monday or in the second week, kind of in a calendar standpoint. You're looking at that period of time. Did you have 40 hours work in that span? What happens if you get to 42 hours, right? Before that work week ends, you're paying 2 hours of overtime. If you have not identified what your work week is, right, then you have the issue of not knowing when 40 hours has been worked or when it ends. Now, oftentimes people will be like, but isn't that the same thing as a regular pay date? Because it's, we pay bi-weekly. There's never going to be a work week that is a 2-week period. A work week is always 1 week, 7 days. Can be any hour kind of cut within that. It can be on Wednesday at noon that your work week ends. Most often it's on, Saturday night or Sunday morning that a new work week starts or ends. But you can choose whatever time. So if you have an organization that is very weekend heavy in work, right? That most of your employees work tremendous period, you're a nightclub, right? Most of your employees work primarily Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. You could set up potentially your work week so that it cuts in the middle of that. So potentially you are paying less overtime depending on how it's set up, that time is cut between 2 work weeks potentially, right? Just something to consider. Being able to have explanations for your employees about an exempt or a non-exempt employee, which we talked about earlier, full or part-time, year-round, or seasonal. Peter and I'm sure, I know I do, I'm pretty sure Peter does, have multiple experiences where somebody is going to say, they fired me because I blew the whistle. We're going to say, we didn't fire you because you blew the whistle. Summer was over. It was a seasonal position. No one ever told me it was a seasonal position. Make sure you're really clear in the onboarding process, whether or not it's full-time, part-time, seasonal, year-round, making sure that everyone is aware of what the expectations are moving forward with that relationship really decreases the liability in the long run. Employment contracts versus at will. So you can enter into a contract with your employees and with your family members, right? If you enter into a contract with family members who are part of the business, right, it likely is going to have a term, and it may be you will be an employee unless and until you commit list of horrendous like acts or activities, right? Or maybe you'll only be an employee for the next 5 years and then they'll ask you to leave. You can have an employee contract that very clearly defines what the term of length is, but also other expectations that are set forth there. If not, you're likely an at-will employee, which means that the employee can leave whenever he or she wants to, or you can terminate them whenever you feel it appropriate, as long as that's not in violation of a law or regulation. Having an overtime policy is also extremely important. Most of the overtime policies that I see say, do not work overtime unless you have permission. If you do so, we will not pay you. Okay, that's wonderful. That's a great scare tactic. You have to pay them even if they work overtime without your permission. So Sally works overtime, but she doesn't have permission of her boss. You see she's worked 4 hours of overtime. Guess who you're yelling at? You're yelling at her boss, and you're reminding Sally, let us know what we could do to make sure that you get all your work done within the 40 hours that we've set forth for this agreement. We will be paying you for that time worked at a rate of time and a half. But moving forward, please, why don't you check in when you're at 36 and you feel as though you are going to need to work overtime that week. Additionally, tracking time worked. You're going to want to make sure you're clear to your employees in some type of written policy that if they work over 6 hours in the course of a shift, they are entitled to half an hour break. That half an hour is unpaid. You can choose to pay them if you'd like to, but it needs to be at least half an hour in length. Additionally, the employee would be entitled to smaller breaks throughout the day of less than 15 minutes in time, but those would have to be paid breaks generally. So you have to provide under the law that half-hour meal break, and then you permissibly provide the other smaller breaks, which would all be paid. Then somebody needed to extend their time away from work. So very quickly, hey, I just do payroll, but now if someone wants time off and my boss has a ton of questions about what that looks like. There's multiple ways in which a person is out of work. Workers' compensation would occur if the employee was injured on the job, right? On the job has an expansive legal definition, which we're not going to get into, but likely MEMIC or whoever you use as a workers' compensation provider will become involved in that process and truly make a determination as to whether it occurred at work. One thing to keep in mind, just from a general workers' comp standpoint, right? Think of injury not just in the physical sense. If someone comes up to you and says, work is stressing me out, I'm so stressed. I'm so stressed because of work that I can't sleep and I throw up every night when I get home, right? Arguably, that is a condition caused by work, okay? Will it be covered under your workers' comp insurance? Probably not, but just keep in mind that this is not just, hey boss, I cut off half my hand, but also different mental aspects of it as well. Another way that somebody may need extended time away from work is under the Americans with Disabilities Act and or the Maine Human Rights Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides an employer must reasonably accommodate an employee's disability, whether mental or physical, and the Maine Human Rights Act provides a similar duty. Now, the Maine Human Rights Act applies to any employer in the room who, well, not just in the room, I mean, maybe they were like only in this room today. Any person in this room, you need one employee or more. It applies to the Institute, it applies to Verrill Dana, applies to TD Bank, right? All of us, it doesn't matter how many people you have. The Maine Human Rights Act is going to apply, and it's going to provide that you have to provide that reasonable accommodation. In many situations, time away from work may be a reasonable accommodation. It may be time away from work to get better. It may be time away from work for surgery. It may be time away from work due to stress and anxiety because at that point in time they have an inability to kind of interact with colleagues. The Family and Medical Leave Act and the Maine Family and Medical Leave Act, right? Family and Medical Leave Act applies to employers with 50 or more employees. Maine Family and Medical Leave Act applies to employers with 15 or more employees. The Maine Family and Medical Leave Act provides that you need to provide employers with at least 10 weeks of unpaid leave in a two-year time frame, as opposed to the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act, which provides that you have to provide employees with up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave in every yearly time frame. I recommend that yearly time frame be measured on a rolling basis, but it's important that you have a policy that very clearly defines how you are going to define these time periods, this 2-year time period or this 1-year time period, right? Now, interestingly enough, workers' compensation, Americans with Disabilities Act, and the Family and Medical Leave Act, these 3 laws that all provide for time away from work are constantly at odds with each other, right? Workers' compensation is all about getting a person back to work. Get them back to work, get them back to work, get them back to work. If anyone's dealt with workers' compensation, they know they've gotten a letter from whoever their carrier is saying, the employee has 12% capacity, please put them back to work. And you're like, oh, do I have to do that? Well, that's what they would like you to do under workers' compensation. The problem is with the Americans with Disabilities Act, if you have removed essential functions of that position, you're not later going to be able to put them back, right? So if you bring someone back to work at 12%, there is a chance that maybe they never get past 12%, right? And you've now set that employee up in a position in which you've removed all the essential functions of the position, likely, right? They're doing 12% of the work. You've likely had to have everyone else carry a heavier burden. And now, 6 months, 9 months, a year later, you're contacting somebody and saying, how can I get rid of them? And we're like, oh, well, you got rid of a bunch of essential functions of the position when you brought them back to work at 12%. So now we're kind of digging ourselves out of that hole, right? The problem is that workers' comp says bring them back. Americans with Disabilities says, wait a second, let's not get rid of any essential functions of the position. And the Family Medical Leave Act is like, I don't care what's wrong with them, right? Or how bad you think it is. If the doctor says that they need to be out of work, you don't ask any more questions. No more questions. Literally, the regulations are very clear. You can ask these 4 questions. If the doctor's handwriting is sloppy, please ask them to rewrite it for you. You can't ask them what certain terms and phrases mean, what they feel as though the likelihood of X, Y, and Z happening is. Nope, they get those 12 or 10 weeks, no questions asked. So you've got 3 statutes that are very much at odds with each other. So if you find yourself in a sticky situation, this is definitely a time to call for backup. Additional ways in which somebody could have extended time away from work. There's the Maine Act of Care for Families. Now, this only applies if your organization provides paid time off for employees. If your organization provides paid time off, you can't have a policy that says you can only use paid time off to go to Disney World or to do home improvement projects, right? No, if you provide that leave, you have to allow the employees to use that time in order to go to doctor's appointment for children, to take care of sick spouses or children, all of those things. And there's also the Victims of Violence statute under Maine state law, and it's in many other states as well, which provides that if the employee and or his or her spouse or children, and I think parents included there, are the victims of domestic violence, then you need to provide, and it can be unpaid time off in order to seek counseling, to go to the police and kind of deal with the issues related to it, and or appear in court. Then I realized, after someone asked for leave, that we don't have any leave policies. What are some important leave policies that we should have? There's no regulation at this time in the state of Maine or federally in which you need to provide any paid time off, vacation, or sick leave. If you are doing that as an organization, kudos to you. That's great. It helps you retain and attract top employees. But otherwise, it's not regulated other than what I talked about just a moment ago, that you can't say you can only use your paid time off to go to Disney World. You could, in fact, however, do two segmented boxes of leave, where you have sick leave and vacation and PTO, in which the PTO or vacation, you need to request it sooner. However, you'd have to request it giving some type of leeway. However, remember that if they don't have enough sick leave to care for a child, then you're going to have to allow them to use that vacation time to care for a child or family member, despite them not giving kind of the appropriate notice to use it. You're also going to want to have anti-discrimination policies in place with regards to leave, and you're thinking to yourself, leave, Tawny, is very different from anti-discrimination. The problem is that if an employee is disabled and they request leave, and or an employee requests FMLA leave, these are protected forms of leave. They are entitled to those leaves, the same way that they're entitled to leave as a result of a workplace injury. You need to make sure that you have an anti-discrimination policy in place that says, if you request these rights that you are entitled to under the law, we will not discriminate or retaliate against you. Otherwise, you have an environment in which employees kind of say, well, I didn't ask for it, or I didn't say anything because I thought they'd fire me. In that anti-discrimination policy, in so much as it applies to leave, we're going to have an identified person, it's likely you guys, yay, come and see me, and if you have X, Y, and Z occur, and then what they should expect. If it's FMLA, you want to make sure that they expect that there's going to be a lot of paperwork, that it's going to be an extended time frame, that they're going to have frequent communications with you. If it's under the ADA, you're going to want to make sure that they understand that there are going to be a multitude of situations in which you're going to be asking how they're doing, what they can do, what their limitations are, all of those type of questions. The more open and forthright you can be at the beginning, the easier it's going to be kind of moving forward. Whether or not your organization permits unpaid leaves of absences. In family-owned businesses, this is really, really important, because I've seen situations in which family member A, B, and C get to have, they go to Jamaica every year and they just take these unpaid leaves and the work just sits there, but then non-family members can't take unpaid leave. Making sure that you have a policy or practice that is equal across the board. It may be that managers can take unpaid leaves of absences if X, Y, and Z qualifications or prerequisites are met, but having some type of standard in place is important. And then reporting accidents or injuries. Again, this goes to, oh, well, I didn't know who to talk to about it. It occurred. I didn't know I was supposed to report it. Well, if you don't have policies, I promise then someone will complain. We have duties, everyone in this room, under the Maine Human Rights Act, to provide a safe and healthy work environment in which there is no discrimination as a result of age, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, not gender identification. I'm missing a ton. You guys want to?
Disability?
Disability, which physical or mental.
Color.
Race.
Color, race. Yeah, religion. So all of these, you would also, with one employee under you, Sarah, which isn't listed here,
Oh, yeah.
military, his armed services duty, smoking of marijuana for medicinal purposes. That's not under the Maine Human Rights Act, but again, a protected class.
Still early.
So that, under the Maine Human Rights Act, one employee. Under Title VII, if you have 15 or more, then you have federal exposure here too. So those are your duties. You also have a duty under state law to provide sexual harassment training and posting. So when I say posting, go back to your office, find that place where you have all your posters set up. I see people furiously writing, do we have posters? What do they look like? There are a multitude of posting requirements that you have under state and federal law. This is one of those times where I say just spend the money and have an organization that gives you those big laminated ones, in part because they change so often that keeping on top of a task like that by checking with the federal and state Department of Labor daily, weekly, monthly just isn't the greatest use of your time. Spend the $25, $50 and get the big laminated posters, and they send you an update saying, unfortunately, the law in your jurisdiction has changed. You need a new poster. It's a super great business model. That one I would have loved to have gotten in on. But so those are important. Now you're also saying to yourself, but Tawny also said sexual harassment training. Yes, you should be training your employees every year on sexual harassment, what it is, how to report it, what they can expect once the report is made, and their rights under the Maine Human Rights Act, right? You also need to be providing anyone who's a manager or supervisor with additional training and telling them how they should respond or react when a complaint is made to them, who they should take it to, what the next step is. Maine Whistleblower Protection Act protects your employees if they make a report of an illegal behavior. Everyone always, I picture in my mind every time I say it, because I often get these glassy eyes from everyone, a civil action. John Travolta was great, but was it John Travolta, civil action? I don't know. Yeah, good, Peter. Yes, that's what I was looking for.
Didn't see it.
Leave it to the attorney.
So a civil action, it's about like dirty water and cancer, right? That's a whistleblower, yay, or like big tobacco, whistleblower, right? No. We're going to talk about some of our war stories, but anything that's illegal, right? Or anything that the individual believes potentially could be illegal. It doesn't have to be illegal. That individual is now protected. I complain that I feel as though I'm being sexually harassed at work, right? Later, they fire me. I'm not only protected from sexual harassment, so I have a claim of sex harassment. I also have a claim under the Whistleblower Protection Act, because I complained about that sexual harassment, which was illegal behavior. So oftentimes the Maine Whistleblower Act is going to accompany another claim. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act. At what age is a person protected? Not from the panel, from the audience.
40.
Anyone else want to take a guess?
18.
Everyone in this room is protected. Under federal law, right, you are protected if you are over the age of 40. Under the Maine Human Rights Act, age itself is a protected class. I don't care what age you are. If you believe that 45-year-old people in your organization are treated better than 35-year-old people in your organization, you can bring a claim. Will it be easy to prove? Probably not, but you are still protected in that class. So you could do young and old. You could say people under 21 are treated with less respect than people who are over the age of 30, right? Every age is protected under the Maine Human Rights Act. OSHA, you have rights and responsibilities to make sure that if an individual reports OSHA violations to you or perceived OSHA violations, that no retaliation occurs against them as a result of that complaint about safety-related issues. You also have concerns regarding the National Labor Relations Act, right? If in any way your policy manual, if you have one, or handbook says something along the lines of do not talk to anyone about any aspect of your employment ever, you're likely in violation of the National Labor Relations Act and a host of
Those are the good
probably
days, yeah.
other laws, right? Whole Foods tried to say that employees could not use their cell phones in order to videotape things that were going on at work. National Labor Relations Act board said, no, you can't do that because it infringes on something known as the section, 7 or 8, because seven.
We'll go with 7.
Yeah, section 7 rights, because all employees have the right to concerted activity to discuss the terms and conditions of employment, which means they could come together and attempt to unionize. They could say they believe they're entitled to better wages. They could say that their boss treats them like garbage and it's not fair. Here's a video of it, right? So those are all ways in which a complaint or statutes where complaining could be a protected activity. So then I realized that, and this is all, when I say these things, this is you guys saying it, not me. Then I realized no one reported the issue previously because there was no reporting policy. So there's all those statutes someone could report something under, but I didn't have a policy. Make sure that you have a policy about dealing with complaints, what our expectations are of employees. I would love everyone to go back to the office and write a policy that says, it is our expectation that if you see something, you say something. If you think we're not doing something in the best possible manner, let us know a better way you think we could be doing it. If you see something you think is illegal or improper, let us know. We're likely going to tell a whole bunch of stories in which we find out 3 months later that, no, I never reported my colleague for making offensive and racist jokes because nobody else did. Make sure it's clear that even if the behavior isn't directed towards an employee, if you see something, that you say something. But then, who do I say something to? Make sure you identify who you should bring that complaint to. This is gonna sound silly, but make sure that it's not just one person. Make sure that you have 2 very different personality types who can have these complaints brought to them. Oftentimes it's best to have a male and a female, to have 2 people who multiple people could feel comfortable with. If it's only one person in your organization who can accept complaints, A, you have a problem if that employee is the one who is doing the bad acts, and B, you have a problem if they're just not an approachable person. What the individual can expect once he or she complains. Will there be a full-scale investigation? Will there be a banner taken out in the newspaper explaining kind of what the investigation was and who complained? What can that individual expect? Anti-retaliation provision within the policy. This is super important to make sure that employees know you bring a complaint, we're not going to fire you. Because oftentimes that is your employee's biggest concern before they bring a complaint. I didn't bring the complaint because I was afraid of what would happen afterwards. Whether or not it would be that my manager didn't give me good work assignments, that the owner kind of looked at me with disgust, insert issue kind of there. And then discipline for employees who violate these expectations, not for the individual who is making the complaint, but so that the individual complaining understands that there will be ramifications for bad actions. Without ramifications for bad actions, it makes absolutely no sense to bring a complaint because it's not going to go anywhere. Then I realized my managers weren't doing the things the way I asked them to, right? I know that everyone in this room is perfect. I know many of you, and I can just see from the faces of everyone else that like you guys all do it right? Which I promise you is exactly what your employees think. We have all been met with so many of the most perfect employees. They are oftentimes plaintiffs in lawsuits, but every single paragraph 12 of a complaint says, I performed my job duties well, and yes, I performed my job duties well and was commended on my job activities. You're like, is this the same person who was employed with us for 6 months who couldn't tie his shoes? Yes, absolutely, but their view of themselves is quite different. So our views of our managers are sometimes tainted as well. It's really important that we look at these individuals and we are clear as to what their strengths and weaknesses are. First, don't throw around titles. Somebody who is really good at their job from an operational level may not be a good manager, and you need to accept that. Which means that just because they're good at their job doesn't mean you give them a supervisor title and put other people below them, because they likely are a horrible manager, right? Understand that there are multiple levels to managing individuals, both understanding operationally what's important and then simultaneously managing people well. Managers and supervisors' actions bind an organization. That means that if I say something racist to a colleague, right, doesn't matter that my boss didn't know, it doesn't matter that the rest of my partners don't know. As a manager, my organization now knows, because the court takes everything that's in my head, everything I have knowledge about, and it imputes it to all of the other managers and owners in the organization. So as soon as you give that manager title to someone, let's say that the 4 of us are all managers in an organization. Deb witnesses somebody making a gender-related joke. I now am imputed with the knowledge of that gender-related joke. So her failure, which would never happen, to take action against that individual is now imputed into me, right? The title of supervisor or manager is not just something that we throw around because it has significant effect on our organization. We have to hold everyone, including family, accountable. That means that when I do something bad, when I make an inappropriate comment or I don't report it, I also need to be disciplined. It means that my record, just because I'm a manager, shouldn't not have any form of personnel action in it. It should have hopefully some type of 360-degree review that says whether or not I'm working well as a manager, whether or not I work well with my peers. Explain the liability for behavior and activities. That is super important, because if your managers don't understand their ability to impute knowledge on each other, they're just not going to share it, right? So having them understand exactly how much they bind an organization is really important. Do regular training. I emphasize this so much in all trainings that I do. Your manager should be trained at least yearly, if not semi-annually. They should be trained in hiring do's and don'ts if they're involved in it. What's an appropriate question? What's an inappropriate question? I also like to talk about implicit biases during this time frame, about who they're choosing to do interviews with and who they're not. Discipline and reviews. Discipline is a very difficult thing to do, but making sure that when we do reviews, we're not sugarcoating everyone's life just because we don't want to deal with conflict. I've seen much too many cases that we get to a time in termination, and I'm looking at the last 4 years of glowing reviews, and I said, what do you mean we're terminating? Well, yeah, but let me tell you what really happened. I don't care what really happened, because these pages make this person look like a glowing star. So like, we need to start again. Handling difficult employees. How do you deal with strong personalities that aren't just strong, but that are also obnoxious and are making it difficult for other people to do their job? How do you rein those people back in and continue to do what you're doing as an organization? And then responding to harassment and discrimination claims is also something all of your managers should be trained on. Little things that you can be doing to help protect your organization, right? Be a leader. Do as I do, not just as I say. You being in this room right now, I think kind of says that you want to learn more about what you can be doing. But that also means that as a leader that we're not making jokes that are a little bit off color that could be seen inappropriately. That when someone is in front of us and they do something that is inappropriate, we call them out on it. And it doesn't mean we have to do it in front of everyone and me be like, David, oh my God, are you for real, right? No, it can be afterwards that I go to David and I say, David, was that really the best choice to make? And we have a private conversation about it. But making sure that it's clear what your expectations are of all of your team. See something, say something. If you're not bringing it up, then your employees aren't going to bring it up as well. Don't move the ball. Have policies and practices in place and stick to them. If you have policies and practices in place, but you don't follow them or you only follow them sometimes, it's not helping your organization grow, and it's actually becoming super confusing for your team because they don't know what your expectation is or how they're supposed to handle these different situations. Also, never leave people guessing about what their position is in an organization. If I'm on the phone with someone and we're getting ready for some form of discipline or termination, and they say to me, this is going to come out of nowhere to them, unless it's a reduction in force and we're getting ready to close our doors or we've had some kind of big change in our operations, no behavioral discussions or termination should come out of the blue to someone. They should have enough foresight based off of verbal warnings, written warnings, performance improvement plans, that they are not guessing as to the reason in which they are walking into your office. Instead, they're like, I am about to be fired, right? That's a horrible feeling, but at least you have set them up to know we've given you every opportunity to be successful, and you have failed to meet that expectation. Create boundaries and expectations, especially in a family business. This is important not just for maintenance of your family unit as a whole, but also for your business. When do we talk about work? When don't we talk about work? What's an appropriate setting? Who can be around when those discussions are occurring? What are the boundaries as to contacting outside of work? Kind of all of these discussions. Most of you are likely running a very lean operation, which means that everyone wears a multitude of hats. Making sure that you're clear as to where those jobs end and start is really important. Also, knowing when you need to ask a professional. You guys all have really busy lives, and there's going to become times in which you're going to want to rely on someone like Deb or Dave to have discussions about kind of best practices. And there's simultaneously going to be situations in which you're going to want to rely on people like Peter or I or whoever your family attorney is to have discussions about best practices from an employment law standpoint. What are so those are your little things, yeah. Bigger things that I can do to help protect my organization. Have a very robust and kind of clear policy handbook that really sets forth your expectations, that can be a go-to guide for your managers and employees so that they have an expectation of what's going to occur. Have really good job descriptions. Make sure it's clear to people what your expectations are of them are. This helps not only from a discipline standpoint, but it also is significantly helpful when we're dealing with issues such as Family and Medical Leave Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, for us to understand what aspects of a job can be performed, what aspects can't be performed. 360 reviews, especially of your management. So often, once someone gets into management, I'm just not seeing reviews, right? It could be because you're a small organization and everyone's really busy, but more often it's just that, like, well, they got to where they got for a reason, so we don't have to review them anymore. That becomes really problematic. And it becomes even more problematic when you don't have an understanding of how your employees feel about management as a whole, right? Once you really start speaking to your employees, you may discover a whole different side of your managers that you never knew existed. Never stop learning. It's great that you guys are here, but recognize that there's a ton of free information out there that can very easily be, it can be spoon-fed to you. Verrill Dana offers a free blog that we update regularly. We don't bombard you with emails. You get an email if something's posted, and you get a flashing alert if there's something super important that we want you to know because it's going to affect you and how you do business. Then I really understood the basics of employment risk in an hour and 2 minutes, so I'm a little over. There's a risk to your company culture. It's going to decrease productivity and the quality of product or service if you have bad employment practices, and it's going to increase productivity and quality if you are operating with good HR practices, which is helping your company culture. There's financial risk. Wage and hour lawsuits, you are looking at triple damages. So let's say you failed to pay me $300 over the course of the last year and I sue you, and it's pretty clear $300, right? By me bringing that lawsuit, if I win, I'm entitled to $900, okay? Plus you get to pay attorney's fees for your attorney, plus you get to pay attorney's fees for the person who sued you. Now, what happens if you inappropriately paid all of your employees and didn't pay them $300 over the course of that year? Well, it probably wasn't just that year. They're going to look back 6 years and say, okay, for the last 6 years, you didn't pay them that much. It was all of your employees. We're tripling it, plus you're paying attorney's fees on both sides. Wage and hour lawsuits, even for a small organization, very quickly get up to $250,000 or $500,000, right? It's not something to fool around with. It's something that can bankrupt an organization really quick. Discrimination lawsuits. If you have between 15 and 100 employees, you're looking at a punitive damages cap of a punitive and compensatory damage cap of $50,000. Between 101 and 200 employees, $100,000. Now, I'm sure you're thinking $50,000, $100,000, that's not that much. You're also paying your attorney's fees, you're also paying plaintiff's attorney's fees, and there's additional forms of damages that aren't capped. So keep that in mind. Public relations risks. Again, it's a small community. We talked about it at the beginning. Recruiting and retaining top talent and general branding becomes an issue if you have kind of not followed everything I said today. We're going to take a short break and let you guys get more coffee, and when we return, we'll do kind of more of the discussion. Got that all in.
You got it all in?
Got it all in.
Wow.
All in an hour.
Sure.
I was gonna say, everyone can ask questions, and then I'm like, not in an hour. How are you? How's everything going?
All right.
Well, I was putting the yes, very good.
Actually,
Yes,
yeah.
And I'm really confident.
Yeah, I feel like my kids like after like 3 washes, you know.
How you doing?
Yeah.
How are you? See you.
Are you?
Yeah.
Just learning more stuff. Really?
I should check up on that and like make sure that the language is not like live and like if I'm I can't remember off the top of my head, so yeah. Yeah, how's your winter been?
Yes.
Yeah. That's one that I'll be nervous about. Like the Maine Restaurant Association.
Right.
Those are the 3 that like anytime they come out,
Yeah.
like we gotta be on. Yeah.
Even more so like they're going to be on the painted.
Exactly. And like all of the voices and stuff, but yeah, those are the next. I'm excited also. And then there's have you heard of this is their first year doing it, but it's gonna be in May. And that looks pretty cool. I think I might attend it. We're close to it, but it's like
Is it like, are they gonna have foods or?
There's the Lucy's actually question for you.
Oh, sure.
Over in the reviews, TED Talk that's coming. Like, yeah, it looks really cool. Check out our website because it's really like someone interested
And
so it seems like it's yeah, exactly. Then I'm gonna get going again.
Oh, sure, that's okay.
and think about vacation. Right. So doctors will be able to time to fight or to walk.
I actually just saw a friend on Facebook who said,
Find the day.
We're reducing their offer if you're quoting the offer. Can we come up there?
You choose, however you want to
Okay,
do
well,
it.
my voice carries too.
Yeah, I was
I'm not,
gonna
I'm not
Mark
shy.
Anthony.
Yeah, we don't need to worry about that.
Is what?
Okay, so I'm going to, Deb Whitworth, I'm going to kick things off, not necessarily with personal stories, although I certainly have quite a few. I've been in human resources 35 years, and like David, I'm a human resources consultant. I also sit on the Maine Human Rights Commission. I've done that now, I'm in my 7th year. So I have plenty of stories from there that may come up as we have our discussion throughout the rest of the morning. But I wanted to share with you some statistics because I'm a numbers and statistics kind of metric geek when it comes to HR. So I want to share some statistics with you, and I'll be pretty brief. So probably most of you know that family-owned and operated businesses account for about 20% of all businesses nationwide. That's a pretty big number. Family businesses are just as vulnerable, as Tawny pointed out, as any other type of business. So none of y'all get a pass. I'm a family-owned business. I don't get a pass. Nobody here gets a pass just because we're family. Most family businesses employ one or more non-relatives to fill specific needs. I think we all can say that we do that. As small as I am, I also have several people who are not family members who work with me. When times get tough with layoffs, chances are that the family member will retain the job and you'll let somebody else go, right? You don't have to nod and smile, but honestly, it's probably what we're going to do. Family members tend to shy away from disciplining other family members because they don't like having those difficult conversations and messing up family relations. When the family member is the wrongdoer, it's hard for staff to speak up, and this can lead to discrimination claims, right? So family businesses are sued for discrimination, harassment, and wrongful termination, even with as few as 3 employees. So here's a couple examples, and I'm going to give you a build up to the big end.
Yeah.
So a dry cleaner, family-owned business. These are not in Maine, by the way. Maine is a little bit too close to home. But EEOC claims. So Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, federal claims. So family member manager harassed a female employee by soliciting sexual favors. There was inappropriate touching. So I want you to keep that in mind for a minute. Inappropriate touching. The settlement paid the complainant $43,000. Not huge money. Probably not going to put anybody out of business, right? Inappropriate touching. A contractor, family-owned business, the head of the family, used his position to harass female employees, then frighten them into silence. No touching, all verbal. Settlement, $80,000. Preschool teacher, so a family-owned preschool, repeatedly victimized by the private school owner, a mother, and her son. The teacher said she was repeatedly punished for objecting to the son's harassment, which included leering, making inappropriate comments about her appearance and clothing. No physical contact, okay? Filed with the EEOC, filed a complaint, she got fired. These are what the damages look like. So we have inappropriate touching, $43,000. No inappropriate touching, $80,000. And then we have leering and making inappropriate comments about appearance and clothing. Damages included for the teacher, $19,000 back pay, $75,000 to the defendant for emotional distress, $50,000 punitive against the son, $50,000 punitive against the school and the mother, $25,000 for reputational harm sustained by the plaintiff, and $45,000 for statutory damages and other costs. I think we'd put attorney fees in that $45,000 for a total of no touching, $264,000. I was using my phone earlier to do the math because I hadn't added it all up. We're talking big money here. This is exactly what Tawny said. This is the kind of thing that puts companies out of business. In the world that I live in, the world that David lives in, I'll speak for David for a minute, we live in a world of no surprises and of being proactive. When you haven't been proactive, that's when you call Tawny and Peter, right? Because you've got to, in many instances, you now need somebody to help you out.
Sometimes
we'll
people
help you
like
out
to
too.
just call me and talk.
Pardon me?
No, no, Peter, that doesn't happen to you.
Well, that's
I thought it was my bubbly personality and just general likability,
Can
no?
we chat for a minute? Don't start the clock ticking.
I had actually a client, forgive me, but I had one client who was an executive director of an organization, small organization. He couldn't restrain himself from telling bad sexual jokes. And he got himself into trouble, and then he consulted with me. So what he used to do was then call me and tell those jokes. And I said, that's fine. I'm billing you by the hour. This is no exaggeration. That's exactly what he would do. He kept his job. He could still have that outlet, and they were terrible. So we are full service.
Whatever you need.
So part of what I think the panel wants to do today is to let you know that it's relatively easy to do the right thing if you know what the right thing is. So Tawny talked a little bit earlier about the blog that you can subscribe to that her law firm produces, and it's free to do that. I'm launching also, not mean to sell anything because this is free as well, but this was an idea that a client of mine had. Deb, do you have like a manual for HR managers, like new people in management, a how to book on not strategic, but very tactical do's and don'ts? And I said, well, I have a lot of white papers that I've written. I think I can turn those into a blog, a monthly blog. So we're launching that this month. It's a how-to for frontline managers and supervisors who have been promoted from making the donuts or making the widgets into now being a manager or supervisor. And it's a how-to guide for them month by month. So there's a way for all of you to get good information that is either relatively or, as Tawny said, no cost. But you have to make a little bit of an effort in order to get that information and then do the right thing. I have some other kinds of things that I'll talk about as we go along relative to Human Rights Commission claims that I'll have to redact as I talk about them. I'll have to censor them. But I'll turn it over to Peter now.
Thank you. So my name is Peter Lowe. I have a very well-organized list of my notes here that I was scratching out, and this is how my mind operates. It can be a little scary to look in, but bear with me. So these are my key terms for you. Usually there's like one or two things that you can take away from a presentation if it all goes well. So here we go. EPLI, fair, name, can't read my own writing, fess up, gets a little weird now, weed, upskirter. Now that last one will have you intrigued. If you're not listening to the rest, you'll say, what the heck's he talking about? All right, I'll start with the practical. A little bit boring, but EPLI, Employment Practices Liability Insurance. So you hear from us, the sky is falling in, you've got to do all these different things. It's all true. When a small business contacts me and they've got that Maine human rights complaint that Deb's going to hear one day and hear us argue, the first thing I want to ask them is, do you have insurance?
Yeah.
It's the first thing I want to ask them about. So go back, talk to your insurance broker or your CFO, whoever it is, and say, do we have EPLI insurance? Check on that. Because
just one second. I used to be in insurance. This is short money. This is not big money. It's typically a rider on your business insurance.
Yeah, it's not, and there'll be the deductible and all that, but one of these claims, if it goes badly, can be very, very expensive, as we've heard, and it gives you that peace of mind. That small business owner isn't going to sleep the first night they get the Maine human rights complaint. They're going to be angry about it. They're going to be dismayed about it. They're going to be emotional about it. And it's going to nag and eat away at them until it's resolved. But they will sleep a little better if they have insurance. So look at that. Fair, I think, was the second thing on my list. It sounds trite, but ultimately, your very best protection, whatever you're dealing with, this myriad of issues, leave, discrimination, harassment, have that central organizing principle of fairness. How am I going to treat people fairly? Because the people who come before the Maine Human Rights Commission, and I've done this now for 28 years, so there's been a lot of claims I've had before the commission in the hundreds. The vast majority of them are not naked opportunists who are shaking the tree to try and get some money. I meet one or two of those, but the great majority have to their core a sense that they were treated unfairly. And I'm a management lawyer. I say that I only represent management. So I'm not, it's not as if I come with an employee bias, probably the contrary. I wear my bias on my sleeve, but they do believe they've been treated unfairly. You don't want ever to get in that place. So when I deal day in, day out with actually proactive consultations about should we terminate somebody. It's an important subject, a hard subject. And you can talk about all the risks under the sun, but fundamentally, I'll ask them at the end and say, so what do you think is the fair decision here? And it's a great barometer. Sounds obvious, but it doesn't always come into play. So always bear that in mind. All right, that was the serious stuff. What did I have next? Well, I guess this one is a little bit the same. I put, if you mess up, fess up. I should do that as a title of a presentation.
You should. I like that.
That's just
good.
if you, in any event,
I'll write it down so you remember.
the best example, I have of that involves my client LL Bean, and this is not a confidential matter because it was in the newspaper. A few years ago, 3 employees were terminated, and I heard about it first from a call from the Director of Public Affairs, who read about it in the newspaper, which is never a good moment. And long story short, the company messed up. And instead of going into defensive mode and saying, all right, let's batten down the hatches, let's get the lawyers ready, we're going to fight you, you're wrong, we didn't do anything wrong, they came out with a public apology. They reinstated the 3 employees. They totally blunted what could have been a damaging public relations issue. And they apologized, and the apology is lost today. I often think that it's a sign of weakness. It's not. It's the opposite at times. So you may find yourself in a situation. I deal with clients day in, day out, where somebody's messed up. We're humans. We mess up. I mess up. You've all messed up at some point. Sometimes it has graver consequences than others. But you need to deal with it. You can't put your head in the sand. And I think we're not experts, but we are experienced, and we're really good at helping you clean your mess ups. And before it becomes that ugly, messy, complicated, expensive lawsuit or claim, that's the time to be getting help. Weed. I don't go anywhere now without talking about marijuana.
I thought she was going to say without it. Well, this has been educational.
No.
Tell me more.
Beer remains my vice, amongst others, but I can't stand the smell of it, for one thing. But
sorry.
No, that's fine. I've been accused of way worse. The issue on weed, marijuana should be more appropriate. Cannabis is even more appropriate term, I guess. But it's an area that actually I got into thanks to Dave and one of his colleagues, and I can't remember.
We didn't give him any.
This is my shameless plug moment, okay? So get your pens out at this point. But the Maine Chamber of Commerce, the Maine Retail Association, asked me and my firm to provide this program, which in fact is free and allows organizations who want workplace consultation about marijuana in the workplace, your policies, your drug and alcohol policies, to obtain that service. They're sponsoring it, and some others as well. MEMIC and others are also involved. So if you're looking at your drug and alcohol policies, there's a free resource that I can give you information about. So shameless plug over, okay? What did that leave? Well, you have no time to speak. So, but
Stop skirting.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's the best.
So you can't make this stuff up. This literally was just a couple of weeks ago. I think this is a totally irrelevant anecdote, but I couldn't resist the term. Actually, it relates to many of the things. One of them, which is dealing with problems when they occur. I was sitting with my client, who's a superintendent of schools, and there was an employee with his lawyer, and there were a thumb drive had been found in a car that he sold. This is actually public information now as well, because it was in the newspaper. And the thumb drive had video clips of many videos that he had taken. Somebody turned it into the police once they looked at the thumb drive. So I'm interviewing him and asking him questions, and he suddenly uses this verb, which I had never heard before. He said, "Oh yeah, those were the upskirting ones." And I thought, my gosh, this is a verb here. In any event, what this gentleman was doing was, filming females, and at times trying to film them up their skirts. He was, I say that now, a teacher. He was a teacher, a special education teacher. And, obviously his career was disintegrating in front of him. But, the client, when you face something like that, you've got the public relations, you've got the employment aspects, you've got the union issues, all happening right in front of you. But it's that time, you're not going to sweep anything under the rug. You're going to take the hit. There's going to be media attention, but you absolutely have to do the right thing immediately. And it's a time where plainly advice is required to navigate that. My last comment on this and overall is, I feel so much of what I do, the law is sort of in the background, and it's very important. And Tony did a great job of walking through all the different things. But ultimately, so many times it's a question of exercising good judgment, getting the help you need, talking to others, whether it's internally or externally. Several minds, several heads are always going to be better than one. So hopefully you're not going to face those types of issues, but from where we sit, we see them day in, day out, and it's sort of roulette. You don't know when it's going to be your organization. Nick and I were talking 10 employees, and hopefully everything goes well, but it just takes one, and then you're in the place I was talking about. Anyway, that was my list. Over to you, Dave.
Good. First of all, everybody know what an expert is? I'm just curious. Anybody know Latin? EX means little, spurt is a drip. That's all an expert is, a little drip. Just so you know. Anyways, I learned that when I was in Latin class way back in some ridiculous 7th grade or something. That's the only thing I know in Latin, other than E pluribus unum, and I'm happy with that. It's interesting. HR has changed in the level of intensity and value over the years. That doesn't mean that HR wasn't important years ago, but when I used to work for Levi Strauss years ago, and even PacSun, and did a lot of district managing and had over 800 employees under me in positions, I called legal. I didn't really call HR. I called legal for most things, or there was the personnel manager, remember the personnel manager, or somebody in charge of it. HR has taken on such an incredible role because of the changes of society. And if you think back, even just 3-4 months ago, 6 months ago, sexual harassment in general has completely turned up on its side as to what harassment really is today. The Me Too movement and everything else that's gone along with it has completely upended what we even would have accepted in the workplace even 6 months ago, or what we would accept today. People who are protected as the top salespeople, as people in the family, people who are, those chosen ones who may have gotten away with things over the last 3, 4, 10 years, in some cases longer, aren't protected anymore. The social media aspect has changed the public relations game. It's changed the information that gets sent out, the way people share information today, the reputations that you have as an organization has really, really changed. And that is something you have to put in context as you think about what we're talking about today. It's not just the fact that we're talking about people. By the way, people have always done these things, right? I always laugh sometimes when people say, this is all new. No, nothing's new. People have always been bad behaviored. It's never really changed. Nothing new. However, the ability of us to now look at it and see it through a different lens is new. And what is acceptable to a generation today is not what was acceptable 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago, right, in terms of what is important. So when you're thinking about your organization today, it's important to stay current. It's important to stay relevant. It's important to get this information. All of us are talking about free information that you can get, information for blogs or manuals that are coming out, or Peter puts out a monthly newsletter that comes out from his organization. I do a radio show called HR Power Hour. It's done each week. You can go to hrpowerhour.com and get that information. It's broadcast right here out of Portland. WLB, done it 6 years, put experts and guests on. Again, it's free information. That's not plugging anything. And both of these have been on my show. And by the way, I did realize that
When someone else cancels, usually.
Yeah, I call him.
I get that call on Monday. It's Tuesday.
It's true. I did know Catherine put me between my two attorneys. I didn't know what that meant and how she positioned me, but they're both my attorneys, and I don't know exactly what that means. But
you need more than two.
I need more than two. I actually have more than two. I do have more than two. The only other thing that I would mention that's important, or that I would think about in talking about is, as everybody said, if you don't know, it's not an excuse, right? That's a powerful statement. If you don't know, it's not an excuse. The law doesn't look at it and say, well, you're new, or, well, you kind of should have known, but I'll give you a pass. It just doesn't do that. And so getting some advice at the front end can save you an awful lot on the back end. Here's the example Tawny made in regards to compensation and wage and hour. There's some incredible lawsuits that are out there in terms of amounts of money that are being going after by, employees after their employer, and class action lawsuits that are really happening. And I was talking to somebody, I remember we were talking about compensation in general. We have 3 compensation experts on the team that do compensation, not only here in Maine, but across the country. And we have never been this busy in compensation. Of course, we were really busy when we thought the law was going to change, and the salary level, the exempt level was going way up. But even today, we are doing incredible amounts of compensation work because people are just concerned about making sure the classification is correct for salespeople, for administration, for all these little things that are out there that you look at, to making sure that you're classifying your people right. And there's a lot of risk. What we're talking about is risk mitigation. That's what we're really talking about. So the reality is we're going to tell you some fun stories. Always got some good ones, right? As we say, we can't make this stuff up. I'll change the word. It was going to stuff up, right? We can't make this stuff up. We're not making it up. That's the scary part. And sometimes it's funny, but if you really think behind the scenes, sometimes it's like, wow, oh my gosh, who would have thought that would happen? Okay, so Tawny, go ahead.
Yeah, so let's start with hopefully with the course of the beginning of the presentation, you get an idea of what to look for, but I want to dig it a little deeper. So let's talk about whistleblowing, right? We had a lawsuit in which it was a healthcare industry worker, and she had been daily daily, complaining that she felt as though they were understaffed, they didn't have enough resources, kind of what everyone in healthcare argues right now. I don't have enough resources, there's not enough hours in the day, right? So she also made a multitude of other complaints, one of which was that somebody stole her salad dressing out of the break room. We get the complaint, we go through the commission, it's pulled, we end up having a lawsuit. In the lawsuit, literally one of the numbered paragraphs in the complaint focuses on the allegation that she made multiple reports that her salad dressing was being stolen, okay? Now, that's protected whistleblowing under the law, right? And you're thinking to yourself, Tawny, it's salad dressing. Well, she's complaining about a theft. Theft is a violation of the law, right? She was blowing the whistle each time she alleged that her salad dressing was being stolen. So we get to the deposition. During the course of the deposition, we ask her a bunch of questions regarding kind of medical devices, staffing, kind of the heart of it. And then we end up spending probably 15 minutes because she doesn't stop talking about the salad dressing being stolen. Come to find out, what had happened was that she allowed a coworker to use her salad dressing, but he used significantly more salad dressing than she believed she gave him permission to use. Now, I say this not because it's at one full end of the spectrum as being completely outrageous and obnoxious. It is, right? But she brought the lawsuit because she didn't feel as though she was being heard. Nothing that she said was heard. So the things that truly were illegal, issues and concerns regarding or perceived by her to be illegal, regarding staffing, regarding her ability to care for patient, regarding patient care, right? Those big issues were happening every day and there was very little they could do. But then there's something that they could have taken action on, right? They could have taken action on speaking to people about where did the salad dressing go, or even just asking her the next question. Do you think you know who used it? Yes. Who do you think used it? Did he ask to use it? Yes. Did you give him permission? Yes. Literally all of that could have occurred with HR 2 years prior, right? And that individual would have felt as though they were being heard. And there's a chance we would not have had the same outcome. We wouldn't have had a lawsuit. We wouldn't have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to kind of figure it out, to do that, right? Understanding that in a lot of cases, your employees just want to be heard, and that's going to have significant ramifications moving forward as to whether or not they are later the person who sues you is important to consider. So that's my first war story that I'll throw out there. I'll now move it on to someone else for another one. And
You
we can
just totally justified my day.
Yeah,
yesterday.
good.
Yesterday was
Good.
constant.
Yeah.
People, I just want to be heard.
No,
true.
and it's important. A lot of times, I mean, we have a saying, all of us have a saying that 20% of your workforce will take up 80% of your time, right? You have only a handful of employees who you are dealing with constantly that never seem as though they're happy. Put that effort into those people because those are the litigious ones. Those are the ones who feel as though they're not being heard, right? And just being heard, responding accordingly, following up with, and it's the last person you want to follow up with and say like, how's everything going? Because you know they're going to have a complaint when you say, how's everything going? But I promise you, when Peter and I put you on the stand later in the case and we say, did you ask her if there were any problems? Yes, I asked her weekly. Did she ever indicate, insert litany of things that are included in the complaint that she never brought up? No. That's a really good position for you to find yourself in. So yes, on days when you leave work just like this was a waste of a day, recognize that it wasn't, because that person now feels heard and likely has decreased your overall liability.
I want to just piggyback on that for a minute. So again, a little bit, couple more statistics here. So Society for Human Resources Management is the worldwide certification and HR membership group that probably, David, you're in, or at least people in your firm. I've been involved with them for, my entire career. And they do surveys all the time. 2016, they did a survey of 600 HR professionals across the country. And in that survey, they determined that culture and relationships were just as important as financial components of the job. That's pretty powerful. 2/3 of those people surveyed, or 402 of them, said that respectful treatment of employees at and from all levels in the organization is the top contributor to job satisfaction. So we're not talking paid vacation time, we're not talking health benefits, we're talking listen to me, I want to be heard, have respect for me even though I make $13 an hour. When we do all of that, we have lower turnover. The cost of turnover for a salaried employee is between 6 and 9 months of pay. The cost of turnover for an hourly employee starts at $10,000 before you even post the job. There's a lot that we can do as employers on the side of prevention and being proactive that will land us in a spot that doesn't have us defending ourselves in front of the Human Rights Commission or in a court of law.
Just to piggyback on that part as well, as I alluded earlier, I work with a lot of clients on, frankly, what I call a termination assessment. And one of the things I'll always ask, particularly when it's a behavioral issue, I frankly believe that we show the same behaviors over and over and over again, frequently, good and bad. And I'll say, oh, do you have the employee's resume or the application Tony talked about? And invariably, the person who has, after a fairly short period of time, turned out to be a bad hire. You look at the resume, and they've gone through jobs. Almost always I see that. Yeah. They've lasted 6 months, 9 months, a year, maybe 2 years, but that's a big red flag. So when you're hiring, you want to know where they've worked before. You want to have that either part of your application, and then you want to find out. And if you can phone a few of those former employers, and if they won't tell you anything, just ask them, would you rehire them? Because they'll answer that question. So those are the ones you look at, and I know my clients say, how did I ever hire this person? I'm thinking, how the heck did you ever hire this person? And a part of it has been that lack of thoroughness and due diligence. You need somebody. They interview really well. They're charming. I'll give you one anecdote on that. This was in the last year, another client of mine. This guy actually, long story short, he came forward and made a complaint under the Americans with Disabilities Act about reasonable accommodation at work. He said that he had a parking spot nearer the building because of his injuries that he sustained in Afghanistan. And his boss told him in sort of not very polite terms that he could no longer have that. He made a complaint. It was legitimate. In investigating the complaint, somebody started to look at his background. Long story short, it turned out he'd never been in Afghanistan. He'd been in boot camp for 9 days and then was kicked out. My paralegal happened to look on his social media page and saw his dog tags. And my paralegal was a Marine and said, those aren't real dog tags. He told his boss, and this is, you can't make this stuff up. He told his boss his mother had died, and he took bereavement leave and went down to Georgia. When the HR person investigated and was asking him questions, said, well, I'm sorry to hear about your mother. But he started to tear up. And then the HR person said, is this a picture of your mother? He said, yeah. Well, this was on Facebook yesterday. He'd made up that his mother had died. This was somebody who, made that complaint and within a few weeks, frankly, was terminated. He'd engaged in whistleblowing. He could bring a claim. He could do all of those things. And I was actually in the place of, bring it on, please, please. I'm dying to take this case and argue it before Deb and the Maine Human Rights Commission.
We love to see you there, Peter.
But, I don't know whether that particular organization could have gleaned those details, but there is a lot that you can find out by looking at someone's resume, because especially for a small business, one person, one bad hire, can really impact you, your organization, the morale, all of those different things.
I also want to just add to that. So think about this for a minute. When you get a resume from somebody, they're giving you information that they want you to have, right? And likely it's beautiful. There are, 15 or 20 or maybe 200 templates that you can, or that they can pull off of Word or Publisher or whatever it is, and they can make it beautiful and present themselves very well. I like a job application because I get the information that I want. I don't ask for years, the year that you graduated, but I do get information that I want, and it includes how long you were at certain employers. I got a resume on behalf of a client a couple of weeks ago, and the resume was beautifully done, but no years of employment. And sent the application and realized exactly what Peter was saying, that the individual had hot jobs, couldn't keep a job, and that didn't come out on the face of the resume. That looked great companies, but so get information that you want rather than be spoon-fed information that somebody else wants you to have.
We had a resume, and you need to dig a little deeper, where the person put the initials MSPT, and it was 8 years, MSPT. It was truthful. MST, it stood for Maine State Prison, Thomaston.
Oh.
And they were incarcerated for 8 years.
That's clever.
Like basket weaving.
Which doesn't necessarily bar them from employment.
We don't have a law yet in Maine that prohibits, doesn't make it discrimination for not hiring a criminal, but you do in some states now.
That's right. It's interesting when we're talking about hiring, right? Hiring is art as much as it is science. I would ask, how many people hire by their gut? A gut reaction, right?
Oh, I do.
I mean, we all do, right? I always talk about the fact that when you meet somebody, you always have a gut reaction. You go, oh, this person seems nice. I'll talk to them. You meet them at a cocktail party, you meet at an event, you meet Tawny. You say, this person seems nice, right? And then you meet someone and you say, hey, this person's awesome. And that might be Deb, right?
I know.
Then you go, and then you meet someone like Peter, and you go, I can't wait to get it fast out of here. So no, he knew it was coming. So, it is a gut feel, but your gut feel has to have some fact behind it, right? And so it's doing your due diligence up front. Look, we do recruiting for a living, right? So I used to hire over 800 people a year. Yes, my head used to hurt a lot of headaches in that. And you do get and I could know within about 3 minutes if I was going to hire them. I spent the rest of the interview figuring out if I was going to actually listen to my gut or actually continue the conversation and hire them, right? Because that's what you do. And the reality is it's a lot more art than science, because fit cannot be defined. The fit is the culture that Deb talks about, the fit of the organization. Will this person work for you? Look, on the outplacement side of our business, I have never had a person come to me and say, I hate the company. Never. Never. In all the years I've ever done outplacement, no one's ever says, I hate the company. They may say that, but when you go, what do you hate about the company? They're the people, right? I hate my boss. Or the leader's an ass. Boop. Nothing good here, right? They will say about the people. People work for people. They don't work for companies. All a company is a bunch of people brought together to do something. And I love when I hear on the news, the company's bad. No, the people in the company are bad. So when you're looking to hire or when you're looking to determine if the person is the right fit for you, it is really the determination of the person. Deb's given some great stats. And I'm not known for stats. That's just not something I normally do. I'm a little bit more at 30,000 feet. But I will tell you that on the Dale Carnegie side of our business, we talk a lot about employee engagement. right? Engagement being, she put somebody that's engaged to you as a person, as a supervisor, right? And the three things that we talk about a lot is the supervisor is the number one person that they have to be engaged to. It's no different than marriage. By the way, most of you are going to spend more time with your supervisor than your spouse or partner. That may be a good thing, may be a bad thing. I'm not judging here. I'm just telling you that's the fact with your supervisor. Second is they have to believe in senior leadership, the direction, the vision of where it's going. And the third, they have to have pride in the organization. Pride's, again, another very light, fluffy word. But if they believe in those three things for an organization, all the research shows, and if you want the research, let me know, it's only about this thick, right? The research shows that those three things truly engage an employee. It's not benefits, it's not money, it's none of that stuff. Their ability to make a difference, to achieve something and make something happen is what engages an employee. And by the way, if you really think about it, isn't that what engages you and what you're doing?
Oh, I feel like that's such a positive note to end it on, but like, I'm not going to let him end it on.
I knew that was coming.
So, Black Cloud, I don't want to ever hear you saying to me, to a lawyer, to Peter, they weren't a good fit, right? Because we immediately are going to say,
Right.
that's a term of art for discrimination.
Yeah.
Tell me why they're not a good fit. And I promise you, once we dig down deep enough, you're going to tell me something along the lines of, they're not a good communicator. They fail to listen. They don't take direction well. They believe they know everything. All of those things, as soon as you yourself hear yourself run through, this person's just not a good fit, I want you to step back. Or if you hear a manager say they're not a good fit, I want you to push back and say why. Why, until you have a true reasoning. Because oftentimes implicit bias is such that it's implicit. We don't know it's occurring, right? We all want people who are like us. An organization does not thrive when everyone is the same. So we don't want to create an organization of people just like us. But when we're making hiring decisions, sometimes it's hard to see past people who aren't like us, who don't see the world from the same vantage point or have the same life experiences. In those interviews, your managers are trying to connect to the person in some way, some shared life experience, to make sure that they're going to be a good fit, that they have something in common with that person. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is if we're making a determination based purely off of that. We need to make sure that we are looking past a good fit and saying exactly why or why not this person would or wouldn't be a good fit. Because sometimes you may just hire someone because you're on the PTA together, or insert similar life experience. But that in and of itself doesn't indicate whether or not he or she is going to successfully be able to perform the tasks that you need for that position. So I feel like David had a really positive kind of end. Here's your super negative end.
It is the buzzkill right there.
But I mean, thank you from myself, I think from the rest of the panel. Thank you so much for your attention today. We really appreciate it. And we're all available, I think, at least for a little bit to talk if people have additional questions. So.
Thank you. If I don't have your business card, if you don't have a business card, you can fold your name tag and put it in here. And I can give you guys